Henock was a wealthy man, known throughout the city for his kindness and generosity. At 45, he lived alone in his sprawling estate on the outskirts of town. Though he had all the comforts wealth could buy, his life lacked the warmth of family. Henock was a private man, focused on his businesses, but he had a compassionate heart, especially for those in need. Among the staff in his house was Baya, a young maid in her early 20s, who had come to work for him after losing the only family she had, her aunt. Baya was diligent and respectful, always performing her duties with quiet efficiency. Though she didn't speak much, Henock noticed her humility and grace, traits he admired deeply. Henock often found himself asking Baya how she was doing. He wasn't prying, he simply wanted to ensure she was comfortable and happy. She would respond politely, often with a small smile, saying that she was fine and thankful for the opportunity to work for him. Henock knew she had faced great hardship in her life, and he felt a growing sense of responsibility for her. Sometimes, he would surprise her with small gifts. They weren't extravagant, perhaps a new shawl for the colder months, or a pair of sturdy shoes for her work. On other occasions, he would add extra money to her already generous salary, telling her it was for anything she might need. Baya would always thank him, her gratitude evident in her soft-spoken words. One evening, as Henock sat in his study, he called Baya to join him. She stood before him, her hands folded nervously. Henock spoke gently, his tone fatherly. "Baya," he said, "I've been thinking. You're still so young, and you have your whole life ahead of you. Tell me, would you like to continue your studies?" Baya's eyes widened in surprise. "My studies," she repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes," Henock said. "I know you've been through a lot, but education is important. If you're willing, I would like to help you return to school." Tears welled up in Baya's eyes. She nodded, her voice trembling with emotion. "Yes, sir. I would love to study again, but I don't know how to thank you." Henock waved his hand dismissively. "There's no need for thanks. I just want to see you succeed and have a better future." From that day, Henock began planning to make it happen. He discreetly started looking for another maid to take over Baya's duties, so she could focus on her studies. He didn't want her to feel burdened by work while pursuing her education. Though Baya continued to perform her tasks diligently, she couldn't hide her excitement about the prospect of returning to school. Henock noticed the newfound spark in her demeanor, and it brought him immense joy. One quiet afternoon, the doorbell to Henock's grand estate rang unexpectedly. Baya, ever dutiful, answered it, revealing a woman standing on the doorstep. She was tall and elegant, her sharp features framed by perfectly styled hair, and her presence exuded a confidence that bordered on arrogance. She introduced herself as Mara and asked to see Henock. When Henock came to the door and saw her, his face lit up with surprise. "Mara," he said, his voice a mix of shock and familiarity. "Yes, Henock," she replied, her lips curving into a faint smile. "It's been a long time." Henock invited her inside, and they sat in the grand living room, exchanging memories. Mara was his first love, a woman he had met years ago, when he went to study in the city as a young man. Their relationship had been brief but intense, filled with the fervor of youthful passion. However, it ended abruptly when Henock finished his studies and returned to his hometown. They hadn't seen each other since. Mara explained that she had come to reconnect, having heard about Henock's success through mutual acquaintances. Her life, she claimed, hadn't been easy, and she wanted to see if there was still something between them. Henock was intrigued by her presence. She was different from the woman he remembered, more polished, but also more hardened by life. Despite the years that had passed, he felt a flicker of the connection they once had and invited her to stay for a while. As days turned into weeks, Henock and Mara grew close again. They spent evenings reminiscing about their younger days and sharing stories about their lives since they parted ways. Henock enjoyed having someone to talk to, someone who knew him before his success and wealth. However, Mara's presence in the house quickly began to disrupt its harmony. She noticed how fond Henock was of Baya, and it unsettled her. She couldn't understand why a man of his status would care so much for a simple maid. The way Henock spoke to Baya with kindness, the small gifts he gave her, and the interest he took in her well-being frustrated Mara. "Why do you give her so much attention?" Mara asked one evening, her tone sharp. "She's just a maid." Henock frowned. "Baya is more than that, Mara. She's been through a lot, and I see it as my responsibility to help her." Mara pursed her lips, but said nothing. In her heart, she felt jealousy brewing. She had come to rekindle her relationship with Henock, but Baya's presence made her feel like an outsider. Mara began to take her frustrations out on Baya. She would assign her extra chores, criticize her work unnecessarily, and speak to her in a cold, dismissive tone. Baya, always respectful, endured it silently. She didn't want to cause trouble, especially since Henock seemed happy to have Mara around. One afternoon, Baya was polishing the dining table when Mara walked in. "You missed a spot," Mara said, her voice curt. Baya quickly apologized and began polishing the table again. Mara watched her for a moment before adding, "You think you're special, don't you? Just because Henock is kind to you. Don't fool yourself. You're just a servant in this house." Baya's hands trembled, but she kept her head down, refusing to engage. The mistreatment didn't stop there. Mara would intentionally belittle Baya in front of the other staff, often giving her the hardest tasks, and then finding fault with her work. Baya tried to avoid Mara as much as possible, but it wasn't always easy. Despite everything, Baya never told Henock about Mara's behavior. She didn't want to seem ungrateful, or cause tension between Henock and Mara. Instead, she carried on with her duties, silently hoping that things would improve. Henock, oblivious to what was happening, continued to show his usual kindness to Baya. He was still making arrangements for her to resume her studies, and had even found a replacement maid to take over her responsibilities. His focus on helping Baya only made Mara's jealousy grow. One evening, as Henock and Mara sat in the living room, Mara decided to voice her frustrations. "Henock, you're too soft on that girl," she said. "What do you mean?" he asked, genuinely puzzled. "She's taking advantage of your kindness. You spoil her, and it's not appropriate." Henock's expression hardened. "Mara, Baya has never once taken advantage of me. She works hard and deserves every bit of kindness I show her. I won't apologize for treating her well." Mara's face flushed with anger, but she didn't press the issue further. Instead, she resolved to find another way to deal with Baya. The atmosphere in the house grew tense. While Henock was focused on his work and plans for Baya's education, Mara was stewing in her jealousy, and Baya was quietly enduring the hostility directed at her. Though she tried to remain strong, the weight of it all began to take a toll on her. Unbeknownst to Henock, the harmony of his home was unraveling, and the bond between him and Mara was being tested by the very woman he had vowed to help. One sunny afternoon, Baya had gone to the market to buy some supplies for the house. The streets were bustling with activity, vendors calling out their wares and children darting between stalls. As Baya carried her basket through a quieter alleyway on her way back home, a van suddenly pulled up beside her. Before she could react, two men grabbed her and forced her inside. Her screams were muffled by the sound of the vehicle speeding away. Back at the house, Henock sat in his study, waiting for Baya to return. Hours passed, and there was no sign of her. He grew increasingly anxious. Baya had always been punctual, and the market was only a short distance away. He paced the house, glancing at the clock repeatedly. "Mara," he called out, "have you seen Baya?" Mara emerged from the living room, sipping tea. She looked unbothered. "No, I haven't." "Why are you so worried, Henock?" "She's a young girl. Maybe she's spending time with a friend or a boyfriend." Henock frowned, his concern deepening. "Baya doesn't have friends or a boyfriend, Mara. This house is her home, and she has nowhere else to go. Something must have happened." Mara shrugged, a slight smirk playing on her lips. "You're overreacting. She'll come back when she's ready." But Henock wasn't convinced. His intuition told him that Baya was in trouble. He called the police, explaining the situation. However, the officer on the other end of the line informed him that they couldn't do much until 48 hours had passed. Frustrated and helpless, Henock spent the night pacing the house, unable to eat or sleep. Mara, on the other hand, was irritated by his worry. "Why do you care so much, Henock?" she snapped at him. "She's just a maid. Why are you acting like she's your family?" Henock's voice was firm. "Baya is like family to me, Mara. She's been through so much, and I've taken it upon myself to ensure she has a safe and happy life. If something happens to her, I'll never forgive myself." Mara turned away, hiding her irritation. Deep down, she knew exactly where Baya was. She was the one who had orchestrated the kidnapping. Consumed by jealousy, Mara had paid the men to take Baya away, hoping to remove her from Henock's life permanently. Meanwhile, Baya sat on the cold floor of a dimly lit room, tears streaming down her face. The men who had kidnapped her had left her there, tied to a chair. Hours later, the door creaked open, and Mara walked in, her heels clicking against the concrete floor. Baya's eyes widened in shock. "Madam Mara," she whispered, her voice trembling. Mara smirked, looking down at the young woman. "Yes, it's me. I told you, Baya, you need to disappear from Henock's life. You've become a nuisance." Baya shook her head, her tears falling freely. "Madam, I've done nothing wrong. Mr. Henock has been like a father to me. I have no family, nowhere to go. Please, let me go back." But Mara's expression remained cold. "I don't care about your sob story, Baya. I'll give you money, enough to start a new life. But you have to leave and never come back." Baya sobbed, her voice cracking. "Please, madam, I can't do that. Mr. Henock has been my only family. I don't want his kindness to be repaid with betrayal." Mara's patience was wearing thin. "This isn't up for debate, Baya. Either you take the money and disappear, or I'll make sure you're never found." Baya cried harder, paralyzed by fear and uncertainty. She didn't know how she could escape, or what Henock would think if she vanished without explanation. As Mara stood over Baya, observing her distress, she noticed something unsettling. Baya was holding her back as if in pain, her face pale and strained. It was as if something had happened to her, something more than just the abduction. Her body seemed to carry the weight of a deeper hurt. Mara's curiosity grew, and she turned to the man who had kidnapped Baya. "What did you do to her?" she snapped, her voice sharp with anger. The man shifted uneasily, looking down at his feet. "She fought back, madam. I had to. I had to subdue her." Mara's eyes flashed with fury. "I didn't tell you to hurt her. Why did you touch her?" she yelled, her voice rising. She stormed over to Baya, kneeling beside her, and gently lifted her chin. "Baya, what's going on? Why are you in so much pain?" Baya winced as Mara's fingers brushed her neck, her back still aching from the rough handling. But there was something else, something that caught Mara's attention. As she gently moved Baya's clothes to get a better look, her fingers brushed over a distinctive mark on Baya's back. It was a birthmark, unmistakable, in the shape of a small crescent moon near her shoulder blade. Mara froze. The shape, the location, it was too familiar. A flash of memory hit her like a thunderclap. What is this mark? Mara asked, her voice trembling. Baya, weak and confused, looked up at her. It's a birthmark, madam. I've always had it. Mara's heart raced as she observed Baya closely, trying to make sense of everything. Her gaze kept returning to the crescent-shaped birthmark on Baya's back, a mark she could never forget. Her mind spun as fragments of her past resurfaced, pieces of a puzzle she had tried to bury for years. Baya, Mara began, her voice softer now. I need you to tell me everything about your life. Who raised you? Where did you grow up? Baya, though still shaken, answered hesitantly. I grew up with my aunt, Madame Rita. She was kind, but she kept to herself a lot. She told me my parents died when I was very young, and she was the only family I had. Mara's breath caught in her throat. The name Madame Rita struck her like a lightning bolt. Her mind flashed back to her youth, to her strict parents and their unyielding rules. She remembered Madame Rita vividly, her mother's closest friend, a woman who often visited their home. Rita was compassionate, but firm, and Mara's parents trusted her implicitly. The memories resurfaced painfully. Mara recalled the day her parents discovered her secret, the pregnancy she had tried so hard to hide. The shame and anger in their eyes had been unbearable. They had taken the baby from her as soon as she gave birth, refusing to let her even hold her child. You'll move on, her mother had said coldly. We'll take care of this. Mara never knew what happened to the baby. Her parents never spoke of it again, and she had been too afraid to ask. She was sent away shortly after, forced to build a new life, and forget the child she had lost. But now, hearing Baya's story, the pieces began to fit together. Her voice trembled as she asked, Baya, where did you grow up? In Ara City, madam, Baya replied, her confusion growing. Mara's pulse quickened. It all made sense. Her parents must have given the baby to Madame Rita, trusting her to raise the child discreetly. Madame Rita had taken Baya in, never revealing the truth. Did Madame Rita ever tell you anything about your parents? Mara asked, trying to keep her voice steady. No, Baya said, shaking her head. She always avoided the subject. She just said they passed away. Mara swallowed hard, her emotions threatening to overwhelm her. She couldn't tell Baya everything, not yet. It was too much for both of them to process. But deep down, she was certain, Baya was the child she had lost, the daughter she had never known. After a long silence, Mara finally spoke. Baya, you don't need to be afraid anymore. I'll make sure no one hurts you again. You're safe with me. Baya looked up at Mara, her eyes filled with confusion and vulnerability. Why are you helping me now, madam? I don't understand. Mara reached out, brushing a strand of hair from Baya's face. Because you deserve kindness, Baya. You've been through enough. Mara's heart ached as she gazed at Baya. She wanted to tell her the truth, to embrace her as the daughter she had lost so long ago. But she knew it wasn't the right time. Instead, she resolved to protect Baya, to be the mother she had never been allowed to be. Turning to the man who had kidnapped Baya, Mara's voice hardened. Let her go. She's free now. The man nodded quickly, releasing Baya from her restraints. Mara helped Baya to her feet, supporting her as they left the dim, oppressive room. As Mara prepared to free Baya, the sound of footsteps thundered outside. The door burst open, and Henock stormed in, flanked by his private investigator. His eyes immediately locked onto Baya, who was visibly weak and trembling. Relief washed over his face, but anger quickly followed as he took in the scene. The men who had kidnapped Baya panicked and bolted for the exit, disappearing before Henock, or his investigator, could apprehend them. Henock didn't waste time on them, his focus was entirely on Baya. "Baya, are you okay?" he asked, rushing to her side. Baya nodded weakly, her voice barely audible. "I'm okay now, sir. Just tired." Henock turned to Mara, who was standing frozen, her face pale and her eyes filled with tears. "What's going on here, Mara?" he demanded, his voice cold and authoritative. Mara opened her mouth to speak, but couldn't form the words. She broke down into uncontrollable sobs, her guilt and shame overwhelming her. "Explain!" Henock shouted, though his attention quickly shifted back to Baya, who seemed unsteady on her feet. "We'll talk later," Henock said firmly. He picked Baya up gently, carrying her out of the place and straight to his car. His private investigator followed, quietly assuring him that they would continue searching for the escaped kidnappers. Henock took Baya to the hospital. At the hospital, Henock stayed by Baya's side through the checkup, ensuring she received the care she needed. The doctors assured him that she was mostly bruised and exhausted, but otherwise unharmed. With that relief, Henock finally allowed himself to breathe. When they returned home, Mara was waiting for them, her face streaked with tears and her hands trembling. She looked like a shadow of the confident woman she usually was. Henock sat Baya on the couch carefully, then turned to Mara with a piercing gaze. "Mara," he said sternly, "I want an explanation. Now." Mara hesitated, tears brimming in her eyes. Finally, she spoke, her voice shaking. I was jealous, Henock. I saw how much you cared for Baya, and it made me feel like I was nothing to you. I thought if she left, things would go back to the way they were. I was going to give her money to leave, but when I saw her at that place, her voice broke. Henock's face darkened with anger, but he remained silent, waiting for her to continue. That's when I noticed the birthmark, Mara continued, her voice almost a whisper. It reminded me of something I'd been trying to forget for years. When I was young, after you left my town, I found out I was pregnant. I wanted to tell you, but you were gone, and I didn't know how to reach you. My parents discovered my secret and allowed me to give birth, but after that, they took the baby away. They never told me where she went. Baya, who had been listening silently, looked up, her confusion plain on her face. Mara turned to Baya, her voice breaking further. When you told me about Madame Rita, I realized, my parents gave my baby to her. Baya, you're my daughter. You're my child. The room fell silent as Henock processed her words. Wait, he said, his voice hoarse. If what you're saying is true. Baya is my daughter too. Our daughter? Mara nodded slowly. Yes. I didn't know until today. I swear, Henock. I didn't know. Henock staggered back, overwhelmed by the revelation. His eyes darted between Mara and Baya, struggling to grasp the truth. You were ready to hurt your own daughter, because of jealousy, he finally said, his voice filled with disbelief. Mara broke down completely, dropping to her knees. I was wrong, Henock. I didn't know. I wasn't thinking clearly. I'm so sorry. Baya, I'm so sorry, she cried, turning to the young woman. Baya, still in shock, whispered, I don't know what to say. Henock took a deep breath, trying to regain his composure. We need to be certain, he said after a moment. We'll do a DNA test. The test was arranged swiftly, and the results confirmed what Mara had claimed. Baya was indeed their daughter. The weight of the truth settled over them all, and for a moment, no one spoke. Finally, Henock broke the silence. Mara, I'm not going to pretend this is easy to forgive, but we have to move forward. For Baya's sake. Mara nodded, tears streaming down her face. I'll do whatever it takes to make it right. Baya, can you ever forgive me? Baya looked at Mara, her emotions a mixture of pain, confusion, and hope. It'll take time, she said honestly. But I'll try. Henock placed a hand on Baya's shoulder. You're not a maid here anymore. You're my daughter. Our daughter. And everything I have is yours. From that day forward, the dynamics in the household changed completely. Baya was no longer a servant, but the heiress of Henock's wealth and legacy. Though the journey to healing was long and filled with challenges, they began rebuilding their lives as a family, learning to love and forgive one another along the way. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please like, comment and share. And don't forget to subscribe and click the notification bell so you won't miss our next video. Bye.